Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for talking with me today and coming on my new-ish YouTube series. Um, for everyone who's not familiar, Amy Nelson is a prolific entrepreneur, mother, former litigator, a woman who embodies standing up to power, speaking truth to power, not in a cliche kind of a way, but in the realest way that I can imagine. And if you haven't followed her story, Amy has been battling Amazon for a number of years, ever since her husband was falsely accused of a crime that he did not commit. And FBI agents showed up at the front door of her family's house, where she lived with her four young daughters, and raided the house. And Amy's been fighting alongside her husband to get the full story out there, using mostly social media because the so many publications wouldn't even cover her story. So I met Amy. I think I had known about Amy. I'd known about you for a while because of your work at the Riveter. And I was a member at the Wing. The Riveter was an all women's or an inclusive co-working space, right? Is that
Yeah, we
yeah.
were based in Seattle. We started in 2017, so kind of around the same time as the Wing.
Yeah. So I had known of Amy in that capacity, and then we were introduced because she had this crazy story, and I was just not expecting what she was going to tell me. So, Amy, thank you. And I know you talk about this all the time, so thank you for talking about it with me again.
No, thank you so much for having me, Ariella. You were somebody who listened to me at a time when very few people did, and I've always been grateful for that.
Good. Yeah, it's so important. So I would love to hear from you where you're at now with the situation. I know that the charges have been dropped,
Well, there were actually
and
never any charges against my
there were never
husband,
any charges.
and
Okay, but
that which is like
you
this, which
wanted
is kind of
him,
a wild thing because everybody thinks there were,
right?
because it was so sensational. But just kind of the timeline backing up a little bit is that the FBI knocked on our door on April 2nd, 2020, so 2 weeks into the pandemic, and told my husband he was accused of a federal crime called private sector honest services fraud, which is depriving your private employer of your honest services. And that employer was Amazon. At the time, he'd been out of Amazon for a year. This was a wildly unexpected occurrence in our lives. Our four little girls were all under the age of 5. Our youngest was 8 months old. And from there, the DOJ spent the next almost 4 years telling my husband that they were going to charge him with a crime, that at any moment the FBI was going to pound on our door and arrest him in front of our little girls. Also, during that period, the government for 22 months seized all of our assets and held them. There's something in America that I didn't know about called civil forfeiture, where state, local, and federal authorities can literally take your money or your things, your car, your house, if they can just allege that it's related to criminal activity. They do not have to charge you with a crime. They do not have to prove a crime. You are not entitled to due process on this because you, the American, are not on the other side of it. It's your asset. So
Do you know
it's a
how
wild thing that I
often
didn't know about.
how often is this happening a year to people? Do you know the numbers on that? Do they even report it? I
So
imagine they don't want, you
there have
know.
been entities that have like done broad scale studies that it's so much money that across the board, state and local and federal governments take. But I will tell you, in this federal context, pre-indictment civil forfeiture, which is what happened to my husband, is incredibly rare. I dug through. My husband was accused in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is, a judicial district. We lived in Seattle, so he's being investigated 3,000 miles away for this crime. And I dug through the history of the docket of the Eastern District of Virginia, and I went back 13 years and couldn't find a single example of civil forfeiture being used the same way prosecutors used it against my husband. So there was this wild investigation. There was an FBI raid. Eventually we got back 85% of our money, so long as we promised not to sue the government, which we had to do at that moment in time. And then the DOJ finally ended their investigation and did not charge my husband in January of 2024. The investigation ended with a lot of fireworks because Not only did the DOJ end the investigation, they ultimately vacated or dismissed 4 criminal pleas from my husband's alleged co-conspirators because they weren't in the interest of justice. And I can't find another instance in history where the DOJ has done this.
It's pretty shocking. And so you know, if you were to sit down face to face with any of these people, Jeff Bezos, the DOJ prosecutors, the FBI agents, the lawyers who worked for Amazon who were really pushing for this, what would you say?
I think I'd say different things to all of them.
Yeah.
But, in the first instance, I think it's really important because I just really hadn't realized this. That I didn't realize the justice system was like this. The people that have destroyed our lives have never had to face us. They've never had to look my husband in the eye or me in the eye or our 4 daughters. And they're just absolute bullies that can hide behind this professional shield. We're lawyers. We're right. And I am a lawyer. And they can take your life apart piece by piece without ever looking at you or without ever proving anything. I mean, I just explained to you all these things that happened, and my husband was never charged with any crime. But I think if I could sit down with the lawyers at Gibson Dunn that were paid tens of millions of dollars by Amazon to do this, I would tell them that they are cowards. And I would ask them that they believed the lies that they told. I'd ask how they sleep at night. I mean, because I think about it all the time. I am a former litigator. I worked for big law. I could never do what these people have done to us. I don't have it in me. If I could sit down with the prosecutors, I would ask them why. One of the really interesting things that happened in our family is that after Amazon accused my husband of a crime, they then sued him in federal court. I do not think they had any intention of following through on the civil lawsuit, but they were using it as yet another tool to kind of bury people. They knew our funds had been seized, and then they sued my husband in federal court, which is like, I'm sorry, is being $1 trillion company not enough of an advantage? Like, you needed to make sure we had no money. But the reason that's interesting is because eventually the case went into discovery, which is the exchange of information. And then my husband was able to get from Amazon all of their communications with the Department of Justice. And what I saw floored me and broke my heart, because I thought in America, if someone accused you of a crime to the DOJ, that they would take that allegation, if they heard you, because they no promise to hear you, they would take that allegation and then investigate it, and that they would investigate it independently. That's not what we found. So what I saw in the communications between Amazon and DOJ is that Amazon met with federal prosecutors over 100 times. They were texting with federal prosecutors late at night. They told federal prosecutors what to subpoena from Amazon, what documents to subpoena. The communication that bothered me the most, though, is that right after Amazon had their first pitch meeting with DOJ to try to charge my husband with a crime, and Amazon had hired a former federal prosecutor from the Eastern District of Virginia to lobby his former colleagues, and that's what he did. His name was Patrick Stokes. And immediately after the first meeting, Patrick Stokes received an email from Jessica Aber, who at the time was the number 2 in charge of criminal investigations at this DOJ office. She later became the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. And Pat and Jess had worked together for years before Pat went to the private sector. And in this email, Jessica Aber wrote to Patrick Stokes that Pat's presentation was amazing and a testament to his and Amazon's hard work. And she said to Pat, please don't worry. I've hand-selected my 2 very best prosecutors for your client's important matter. And every time you hear someone get on a stage like Merrick Garland and say there's one rule of law for all, not one for the rich and one for the poor, it's a lie. Yeah. Because if you're promised the A team, who gets the B team? Was it like the Epstein victims? Was it, is it... And I think I understand why it works that way now, because justice is business in America. It's not really about right and wrong. It's a business. And, Amazon, most federal prosecutors will leave the DOJ and go into private practice. Amazon would be one hell of a client to have when you leave. You know who wouldn't be a good client? The Epstein victims, the Olympic gymnasts. They're not going to hire you, right? But Amazon will, or Boeing, or, someone else with a whole lot of money.
Right.
And it's a business. And that's how it works.
Do you think that there's any way to stop that, to like change the like to change the system of this revolving door that like is like to break people out of this matrix into, because I feel like people when they're still within the system drinking whatever Kool-Aid, maybe they're accustomed to a salary or they think that they're going to make more of a salary when they leave the government. They have this trajectory for themselves and their lives mapped out, and they can
And
only
it,
really imagine that they would, the pathway to working at a big law firm and making a lot of money and having Amazon as a client is like the dream for them. So how do we like Amy, fix the legal system? No.
no, but I
How
mean,
do
like, no, but
how do
I've
we
thought a lot
change
about
that,
it, right?
Like,
I've thought a lot about it because someone has to fucking fix it, right? Like somebody has to stand up and say enough. And it's really complicated politically because at this moment in time, because there are a lot of awfully scary or not great things about the Trump administration.
right.
However, President Trump was targeted by this system. Kash Patel, who I believe will be confirmed to lead the FBI, was targeted by the system. And he's a former federal public defender. We have never had a former federal public defender lead the FBI. So there is opportunity for reform, I think. And that's a complicated thing, but I also believe that like you do the good you can wherever you can. And so if there's an opening to lobby these officials, we should. But there are certain things like when Patrick Stokes left the Eastern District of Virginia, he was not allowed to represent a client before the Eastern District of Virginia for 1 year.
Okay.
1 year is a bullshit amount of time, right? Like that's just dumb. I think there should be a lifetime ban on representing paying clients in the office that you worked in. There are like, I don't know, like 90 offices for the DOJ around the country. Like surely you can go work in it, like represent clients in another one. Like if we allow it, we're just admitting that it's about relationships and power and access.
I wonder, there's been such a call for reform to pay people in the government more, which some people disagree with because they think that like you shouldn't, the taxpayer dollars shouldn't be going to these very cushy salaries. But if you paid people more and I think there are probably some people who are career employees at these departments who want to be in the government forever and they're there to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But then it's muddied by these other people who have these other incentives, both political and financial and psychological. And they want to, they don't have like justice in mind, as you say. It's just all a financial play or a play to like advance in their own lives and careers. So I wonder if there's a case to be made, for increasing certain salaries.
I mean, I absolutely think we should increase salaries in the federal government for a number of positions for the reasons you state. It's like you look at like very few people can actually become federal judges if they have families and want to save for college unless they come from wealth. And that's what you end up with is a lot of people with a lot of wealth. And it's the same thing you end up with in federal prosecutors' offices. It's a lot of people who have generational wealth in their families, or they're going in for 3 to 5 years and then they'll come out and, into the private sector and make millions of dollars. And, I think, there's a lawyer who works for Gibson Dunn now. His name is George Hazel. He was a federal judge in Maryland and he quit being a federal judge and went to go work at Gibson Dunn. And he mentioned part of it, was like providing for his family. And to be fair, like making $175,000 is nothing to blink at. It is a lot of money. However, if like I paid for law school, like I'm still paying my law school loans, right? Like it's prohibitive to do that if you want to have a family. So I think increasing salaries, we definitely should. I also think we should increase the salaries of members of Congress and not allow them to inside trade, because I think it is like unbelievable that in America we all acknowledge that politicians inside trade and become millionaires in office.